I guess now it's my turn, unless you want some of you to say some more few words. So just give me a second to share my screen. And I guess now it should be visible to all of you. I hope so, at least. Can I have a confirmation from someone if you can see the slide?
Yes,
okay,
great.
Thank you. Great. So hello, everyone. Welcome to this event, which is dedicated to green infrastructure and urban agriculture. My first presentation bears the same name as Urban Green Infrastructure and Urban Agriculture for Sustainable Cities, because I have tried to collect different examples of urban green infrastructure and urban agriculture. I will introduce you to this topic because I'm not so familiar about what's your current knowledge of that. So that's why I will start with a short historical excursus to explain how this topic has evolved throughout decades. And then I will go through some examples of green infrastructure in planning and in design. My name is Attila Toth. I'm head of the Institute of Landscape Architecture at the Slovak University of Agriculture in Nitra. Okay, the lower part of the slide is not visible, says someone. I'm not quite sure why, because I see all my slide. So is anyone else having the same trouble, that you don't see the lower part of the slide?
Yeah, the lower part is hiding.
Okay, I'm not sure why. Hopefully, how big is the part which is not visible?
But it seems that it's the issue of the Zoom of this tool, because there is some bar with additional opportunities and possibilities.
Can you now read this?
Planning idea in Europe, it's the last one.
Yeah, then it's fine. Then nothing is hidden. Okay, well, so again, back to my introduction, and I would like to ask the organizers to keep an eye on the chat box, because I will focus from now on my presentation. And if you have any questions, please keep them till the end of the presentation, which will last for around 30 minutes. So I'm head of the Institute of Landscape Architecture at the Slovak University of Agriculture in Nitra, and my research specialty is green infrastructure in planning, design, and implementation, which I also implement in my teaching, that is mostly focused on design studios in bachelor and in master courses. So first of all, I would like to have a brief overview of how green infrastructure as a topic has been generated and evolved throughout the last decades, and especially the previous century, as a planning idea, for which I would like to start with this idea of the city as an egg, which was produced by the architect Cedric Price in 1982. And this explains how cities have formed from ancient, with a clear nucleus of the city and clear city walls. This can be seen as a boiled egg. The fried egg came later on in the modern period, between 17th and 19th cities, when cities started to grow over their ancient walls. And what we see now, the modern city, which we might also call post-industrial cities, they are a scrambled egg, which is a mixture of built-up areas, open spaces, green infrastructures. Also in the historical periods, there were times where cities were planned with integrated green infrastructure. We might think about La Ciudad Lineal from Madrid, where we have a central green line across the city. Also the Garden Cities of Tomorrow by Ebenezer Howard, who was an urban planner and an enthusiast in planning, and who developed this urban planning concept, which was called Garden Cities of Tomorrow. Again, I see something coming into the chat, so I just want to ask the organizers if there is anything crucial or critical which comes up to my slides, then please just unmute yourself and tell me so that I know if I have to stop for a while or if it can wait till the discussion. Okay, so back to this. There were also the concept of green rings and green belts, which was, for instance, developed in the city of Vienna on the left, or in the city of London. And you can see the concept of medieval cities with ancient walls. Around these, there was normally a wide open green space, like here. This is the glacis in Vienna. And a similar concept was developed to London. And radially, this was normally repeated in circles around the city. Another concept was the finger plan in Copenhagen, which is based on green, so-called green veggies. And these green veggies come from the surrounding landscapes and enter the city as fingers. That's why it is called the finger concept, because the urban development, as you might see, is going along the fingers, and in between the fingers, the nature from around the city is coming inside the city as wedges, and this is the so-called like the main system or the main part of the green infrastructure of the city. And similar is also in Helsinki, where of course these green wedges are not organized according to the fingers, but they are radially entering the city. Around the 1980s, in European conditions especially, but also in Northern America, there was an approach of developing ecological networks, including biocorridors, biocenters, interaction elements. And you can see here, for instance, this spatial configuration, which is visible here. You can see some core areas within the network. You can see connection lines and interaction elements within this system. Green infrastructure within the EU Green Infrastructure Strategy came up also as a policy issue. Before, green infrastructure was mostly developed as a research topic in Northern America and in European space, but later on it made its way also to ecological and planning conceptions. These planning conceptions were basically introduced also into policy schemes, for instance, into green infrastructure strategy. But moreover, this made also its way to EU biodiversity strategy now to 2030, because there is a new one, or also to other conceptions like the common agricultural policy in the form of eco schemes, and also to other fields related to water, to forests, to agricultural landscapes, or to climate change. Recently, there have been also other conceptions, like, for instance, the nature-based solutions or ecosystem services, which are pretty much related to each other. So that's why I entered this slide, which is supposed to explain the difference or maybe the similarities between the system or how we might look at it. If we consider green infrastructure, then we normally think about a system of green spaces, green lines, green corridors, which connect urban and rural, which connect built-up area and open landscape, and which integrate, for instance, protected natural areas, but also everyday green spaces in the landscape, and also things like multifunctional organic farming, wildlife overpasses, Natura 2000 areas, or also green walls, green roofs, and other particular elements of the system. Ecosystem service is a concept which looks at the functions of the overall system regarding the Anthropocene. So what type of functions and what type of services do ecosystems, including green infrastructures, provide to people? And there is three groups. There is the provisioning services, the regulating services, and the cultural services. We as landscape architects are mostly concerned about cultural services. We look at spiritual values, aesthetic values, personal growth, leisure, fun, recreation, and all uses of the landscape and such. But also we have to consider all the other functions of the landscape, such as the provisioning, because we need landscapes for food growing. This is related to the urban agriculture topic, or also wood, timber, energy, and also regulating services, which is highly relevant, especially for topics like biodiversity crisis, climate crisis, pollination crisis, and all the topics which are which we might call global challenges of common societies. And then nature-based solutions might be seen as a conception which looks at green infrastructure as a tool and nature as an inspiring system, and tries to find solutions to current problems like infrastructure, management, protection, and all areas regarding biodiversity benefits and human well-being, to answer current societal challenges through nature-based or nature-inspired or nature-mimicking solutions that are investing into nature in order to solve current societal problems, and at the same time to provide a wide range of different benefits, different services, which is deeply in line with the multifunctionality of green infrastructure. So that was maybe to understand where green infrastructure comes from, what is the historical background, what are the historical conceptions, what is the current status quo, and what is the current situation in policy. And now we will go through some examples of green infrastructure at the regional and urban scale, how it is integrated and incorporated into planning systems and conceptions. Perhaps one of the most well-known and also very relevant for today's audience here in this lecture, it is the European Green Belt, which used to be, for those who remember a little bit longer part of the history, this used to be the Iron Curtain, which divided, or which used to divide Europe into West and into East throughout the second half of the 20th century. And then also throughout this time, because it was a no-go zone, basically in many of the areas, in different types of landscapes, in coastal areas, but also in agricultural landscapes. This developed into a linear ecosystem, a pan-European backbone of the European green infrastructure, how is it called also today. And this is a topic which is of pan-European and also Baltic interest and importance. There were some things and some conceptual works also on the models. If we look, for instance, at the already mentioned Green Belt model of London, which you can see on the left, this developed thanks to the green infrastructure concept also to the so-called green grid. So also connections across the system, joining the landscape into one permeable green grid. Another good example is the Regio Grün in Cologne, Germany, which built also on the historic structures of the traditional green belts. This is the inner green belt, the outer green belt, the regional green belt. And now the conception is developed into connections between these circular systems along the city, so that the city is functionally and spatially linked to its surrounding landscape. And now I will show you some inspiring projects of green infrastructure across Europe, which might be of interest for all of you who are dealing with sustainability of cities, sustainable development, or climate change mitigation, measures for mitigating climate change, measures for supporting pollinators, measures for supporting biodiversity, and all these fields. For you, green infrastructure might be seen as a tool in urban landscapes, in urban environments, to improve the current state of the art in open space design. A very nice example comes from Paris, from Parc Clichy-Batignolles, which is also known as Parc Martin Luther King, who was a famous personality in the US, basically because of human rights. And he's the name giver of this park, which was produced by the landscape architect Jacqueline Osti and her partners. This used to be a railway park, a railway cargo area, which was redeveloped into an urban park, and also integrating some of the historical parts of the landscape, such as old railway lines and constructions. And the interesting thing is that this became a green spot, a green center of a new residential area, of a new urban borough, if you like, so part of the city of Paris. And then later on, also different new building concepts and building areas rose around this area, and it continued growing towards this site. So it did not end with this original project. This project is very famous for sustainable rainwater management, which is being collected through different water channels and ending up in a retention pond like you see here. And here you can see some of the channels which are collecting rainwater from the roofs. This system is interconnected, it collects the water, and then it uses it as part of the open space, which is used for recreation, for running, for walking around, and so on. And this is already the continuing part, which is continuing from this retention pond further. So it continues the system of the green infrastructure in further zone. You can see how well it is used by the citizens for jogging, for making exercises, for meeting around, providing a very attractive open space for staying along, but also making a very nice legacy towards the history of the site, which used to be a railway station before. So you can still see here the railway lines and the constructions and the red gravel and some vegetation resembling accompanying vegetation of railway lines as cultural part of this open space. Another nice example is the Ecology Park in London, where along the River Thames, an ecological park and the residential zone was created, like you can see in this picture. And water, which is very often considered as the problem, including water management, is here nicely included, sort of like a lawn in normal residential areas, where you can stop by or enjoy the view of some small biotopes, read about the biodiversity in the site, which is being hosted by these small landscapes. And this is the ecological park, where you might say all you need is reed. This is reed and willows and very simple vegetation combined with water, providing the possibility to observe birds or other sort of biodiversity, especially insects. And this is a nice example of integrating water into landscape, just as Sjöstad Hammarby in Stockholm, which you might know for those of you who come from the Baltic area. And this is also a nice example how water is nicely and effectively integrated into open spaces of the urban area. You might go for walks along these open spaces, and also these structures help you to get on the top of the water, which is always very attractive for people who might use such small meeting points on the water. And this is a way which symbolically, but also functionally and spatially links water with the open spaces of the urban landscape. Maybe a little bit different cultural background has this project of Seestadt Aspern in Vienna. The Seestadt Aspern is also a nice place which has a history. It used to be a field airport before, or an airfield, similarly to Tempelhof in Berlin. and they decided to develop a new urban district. The first thing they did is they brought the metro line into this new residential district, and they created the lake in the middle and open green spaces around, and the city started to continuously grow all along, and resulted into a system where you might arrive from the city center with the metro line, so you actually don't need to have a car if you want to access the city center. And they also invested into, I might call, temporary landscapes, because this is a very dynamically growing urban district. So what they did is they developed temporary landscapes for people to enjoy. And for instance, these structures are not there anymore, and something new will come as the city grows along the lake, which was one of the first investments in this area. And here you can see how the open spaces between the buildings and in the streetscapes make the open spaces of the city district more vivid and enjoyable. A nice example comes also from Brno, from Czech Republic. This is the settlement or the residential zone called Park pod Plachtami. Plachty is a mountain range which is above this residential area. And this is a typical settlement structure from the 1960s, 70s, which was built in the socialist style. Big Plattenbausiedlung, you might call in German. And they decided to start collecting water on the top of the buildings and concentrate them into the lowest part of the whole open space, which was located here according to measurements. And here they collect water and created such a small biotope, which is also, on the other hand, an attractive part of the open space. A nice example is the Rio Manzanares, coming from Madrid, which was partly designed by West State Office and partly designed by other Spanish offices. West State was designing only a small part of this promenade, but Spanish offices were designing the other parts. And the general idea was that the river Manzanares was cut away from the residents because of very busy roads along, and the city department decided in one election period to put all this road system below the surface and instead develop open spaces for the people and make the water of Rio Manzanares enjoyable and accessible to the general public. You can see here how it looks now after removing or putting the traffic below the surface, and now you have a wide open space for people, also with stylized water courses, and also with the possibility of coming, seeing, and enjoying water as a surface. And the example of redeveloping old railway areas into open spaces or high quality green spaces and green infrastructure elements in the city is also very well represented by the Rudolf Bednar Park in Vienna. This was designed by the Swiss office Haga and Haga Landschaftsarchitekten and partners. And the interesting thing about it is that first what happened was developing an open public park for everyone, and gradually the buildings and the residential zone was growing all along this park. So there was already a nice green space to enjoy and to reach when starting to live in this new residential district. Here you can see how it looks like. This very dynamic, changeable area with typical elements of this orange structures used in the design. You can see it also here. And this is a picture which still shows you the construction site of the new elements. There is a small kindergarten, and this tree is sort of a legacy of the site from previous areas, because this is just a few hundred meters from the Danube River. And there is an old poplar tree which was kept here during the construction as a memento of the original site. The Schiphol Airport is an interesting green infrastructure development project done by West Aid. because they have planted several hundreds of birch trees, which is a very well-known pioneering tree for redevelopment of sites. And they have improved open spaces of the airport, also environmentally, but also in terms of open space. So you might enjoy the waiting time for your next flight, also enjoying this open green space, which is highly attractive. And now I go back shortly to Cologne, where I showed you that there is a Regio Grün project. This is on one hand at the urban landscape scale, which includes the inner ring and the outer ring. And within this outer ring, I will show you two interesting projects. The first one is located here, or the second one is located here. This is the Waldlabor, the forest lab. And this is the agricultural park Belvedere, which is also a very nice example of urban agriculture. Here you can see the project input, which redeveloped agricultural landscapes into a public park for citizens who might enjoy biodiversity in the form of biodiversity lines and strips along roads and paths. As you can see here, this is for cyclists and pedestrians. And here are the biobelts, which are sometimes a little bit wider and sometimes a little bit narrower. And then you have these very idiosyncratic viewing towers, which make the site rememberable and also improves its local identity. Here you can see the flowering strips, which includes also informing tables that the farmer is doing something for biodiversity and pollinators and sustainability of agricultural landscapes. So this is a nice example where agriculture is combined with green infrastructure and creates a sustainable urban landscape and environment. Another nice example is the Waldlabor, not far away from the previous project, just a couple of kilometers. And this was developed by the same office, like the previous project by Lorberg Stadtlandschaftsarchitektur from Stuttgart. And this office implemented planting of trees, of fast-growing trees like poplars and willows into such structures, which is harvested every 3 or 4 years. So that's also a biomass for energy creation. And then there is a climatic forests, which are testing different tree species, how they react on the changing climate. From here you arrive from the traditional 19th century urban forests. You join this very particular landscape, and thanks to this line, you are wandering through a very interesting park concept, which is not so conventional, and it informs also the public about issues like climate change, about issues like biodiversity and tree species and so on. And trees are planted in these small structures, and also there is the possibility to buy an own tree which is being planted along the paths. Here you can see some of the fast-growing copies, as well as here. This is a below structure which creates a very interesting landscape to enjoy and to have an experience, an open space experience. And also land art elements are being implemented, like this one from willow branches, which was developed by students within a workshop. And last but not least, green infrastructure is making its way also on traditional sites like brownfields, roofs, walls, highways. And I just collected some examples how we can also use those spaces which are still available and still to be developed, how we can use them to improving green infrastructure and implementing green infrastructure. You can see here brownfields from Germany and from Italy. This one is from Torino, which was developed by Latz und Partner landscape architects. And this is a very nice picture which shows different possibilities of green infrastructure, like redeveloping industrial areas on one hand, greening roofs on the other hand, greening walls on the other hand. So that's a nice picture which combines everything into one space. Here you can see a redevelopment of green infrastructure or redevelopment of brownfield in Essen, in the Ruhr area or Ruhr metropolis of Germany, and a very famous park also by Latson Partner. This is the landscape park Duisburg North in northwest Germany. Another good example is greening rooftops. There are some examples from Czech Republic, UK, and Germany. You can see some examples of intensive rooftops, which is used as open spaces and parks or squares for students at the Greenwich University. You can see examples of combination between extensive and intensive green roofs, like you can see here on the two examples from Czech Republic, and an extensive green roof, which is an example from Germany, where you can find such and similar green roofs on most of the garage tops, or also on the rooftops of small bicycle stands, and so on. And greening walls is another opportunity which gives us additional space in dense urban landscapes, where we can still integrate some green elements, where we can still improve the urban landscape and this green infrastructure. And these are examples from Madrid, from Paris, from Vienna, which show different possibilities of rather more intensive green walls to rather more extensive green roofs, as you can see in this picture from Vienna. And the nice example on this is this is a museum building, and this is a municipality building. So that's also a very important message, I think, to most of the planners and city administrations, that that's a possibility for us to invest into public goods, into public buildings, into public infrastructure, and create a greener and more sustainable solution to these open spaces. And which is a typical sign of most of the highways, especially in Austria, but we tend to see these examples all over Europe. That's the so-called ecoducts. That's a possibility for wildlife, but also for humans to cross linear barriers in the landscape, such as a highway. And to think in different dimensions, parks and open green spaces can grow into 3D, and you can develop a multi-story, multi-level urban park like the one in MFO in Zurich, where you can see that the park has several stories, has several structures, and the green is growing on constructions, where you can use also sitting possibilities and different levels and enjoy different views and different experiences of the park. But you can also see an example how recyclation of materials is being used, because what might look like gravel here is actually recycled colored glass, green and brown and white, which is used as a gravel in this case. Here is the situation, what you see from the top. Here you can see a detail of the glass as a gravel, which is also very interesting from aesthetic point of view. And here again, you can see how this park is spatially organized and creates a very convenient and cozy space for visitors. And I have slightly overcome my time, as I can see on my watch. So I would like to thank you for your kind attention. Unfortunately, I could not see your faces during I was presenting, but I hope you managed to keep the track, and that it was somehow at least interesting for you and giving you new ideas, new knowledge, new inspiration. And I would like to finish my lecture with this quote coming from London, from a small pocket park, which says, "Keep cities wild, keep cities green and make them more sustainable. Thank you for your attention again.